DirectX 12 Ultimate sounds pretty damn impressive, right? I mean, after all, the name Ultimate certainly makes it sound pretty damn important. And you'd be right, DirectX 12 Ultimate is going to be a major step forward for both PC gaming and also a key factor for the Xbox Series X as well. But the question is, what exactly is DirectX 12 Ultimate and why is it so important for both of those platforms? Well, I'd like you to cast your mind back prior to the release of DirectX 12. Back in, let's say, 2013, 2012, a common complaint with developers was that PCs lacked the potential to optimize compared to a console. With a console, developers had low-level access to the GPU. You might have heard phrases such as coding to the metal and exposed metal and various other kind of catchphrases. Basically, developers could better understand the utilization of the system and, more importantly, could code efficiently to make full use of the hardware. This was compounded by the fact that multi-core processors were now commonplace. 4 cores, 8 threads was not uncommon in high-end systems of the time. So ultimately what you had is an API which just wasn't able to utilize all of those processor cores and also had quite a high overhead as well. Microsoft did release updates for DX11 to better support multi-threading, but ultimately it still wasn't enough. Games like FreeFlow did show what this API was capable of. If you had a quad-core processor, ideally with hyper-threading, so I tested with a i7-4770K and a couple of different AMD GPUs, you could see a significant performance enhancement by simply switching to the Mantle API. We also saw a massive number of draw calls possible as well. And of course, the API overhead test was a great example of this. But the good news is, while AMD's API didn't necessarily have as long a life as perhaps some people had hoped, it did serve as a flame to kindle development for both of Vulkan. Ultimately, Vulkan is pretty much born from the ashes of Mantle, as I've discussed with Cronus Group before, so you can check those interviews out if you would like. But not only did we see development with Vulkan, but also Microsoft announced that they were working on DirectX 12, and this was back in 2014, although the API shipped a year later-ish with Windows 10 back in mid-2015. DirectX 12 brought many enhancements. The capability of DirectX 12 was really demonstrated with Ashes of the Singularity first, which was an RTS title designed around massive scale conflicts with hundreds of units potentially on screen and a huge amount of stuff for your system to keep on top of. But since then, Microsoft have continued to push DirectX 12, providing smaller updates to the API, but just as importantly, game developers now have started to push titles out more readily for it. And now we have titles like Control, Resident Evil 3 and Tomb Raider, which all support DirectX 12. And of course, Microsoft's own game studios also support the API heavily, including Gears 5. Alright, so I've spoken a lot about what happened 5 years ago, but what does this have to do with DirectX 12 Ultimate and why is it so important for the PC and Xbox? DirectX 12 Ultimate really is an evolution of the DirectX 12 API. Microsoft actually refers to it internally as DirectX 12 _Tier 2 and includes several very important features including Raytracing and variable rate shading. But while features are important, uniformity of features are also as important. Listening to Microsoft's own Developer Day conferences, there's a theme. The company wanted to have uniformity with both PC and Xbox development. Keeping things simple, as we'll get more technical in a future video on the various features here, the DirectX 12 codebase running on the Xbox One, according to Microsoft themselves, is not the same as the PC, and also requires different optimizations. Of course, it also does not support certain features either. Meanwhile, PC hardware and feature sets are all over the place, with the only current GPU which actually supports DirectX 12 Ultimate being Nvidia's Turing architecture. Well, actually, that's not technically true either, as Turing is split into two sets of cards. The first is RTX, which does support all of this stuff like ray tracing, and the GTX 16X series, which doesn't. However, it does support other features like variable rate shading. So, let's get to the point. DirectX 12 Ultimate allows developers to know what features future PC graphics cards will support, while also knowing that if they spend a lot of time and resources crafting code to reach those GPUs, at the very least it will run on the Xbox Series X as well. AMD will launch DirectX 12 Ultimate GPUs with the next generation of Radeon cards, known as RDNA 2 for the architecture, and the company have shown off a ray tracing demo, and confirmed stuff like variable rate shading will be supported on upcoming GPUs as well. So, if you own a graphics card now which does not support these features like Nvidia's Pascal or AMD's RDNA 1 cards, such as the RX 5700, then of course these features will not be available in games. But what you can do is be damn sure that when you next upgrade, your next card will support these features. Furthermore, because the Xbox Series X will share a very similar feature set to what's available in the latest PC graphics cards, it breaks the chicken and egg situation which often we find ourselves in on PC for new features. Ray tracing and say mesh shaders are a great example of this, but throughout history there's been, well, similar for PC gaming. When new tech is available, it takes time for the tech to saturate the market enough for developers to take full advantage of it. For example, when 3D cards were in their infancy, developers were still coding games for software renderers, as well as, say, the fancy schmancy 3DFX Voodoo cards that you just coughed up several $100 for. Here, developers know that if they develop a title with features which can run on the Xbox Series X, much of that work can also run on the PC, because your RTX 2080 Ti can, for example, run ray tracing. Naturally, there's still work to be done for titles, as lower-end PC cards, such as the RTX 2060, may not be as capable of cranking out as much work as the Xbox Series X. And of course, faster cards will get released in the future, and these will be even more capable than the RTX 2080 Ti is now. And this is not so difficult to get around compared to a totally different feature set and APIs. Developers can simply provide in-game toggles, of course, for PC games, allowing users to change and adjust the in-game rendered resolution from, say, 1440p to 4K, adjust texture details, tweak draw distances or model details, adjust how ray tracing is handled, for example how many surfaces it will bounce to, and so on and so on. In essence though, console games essentially operating with specific settings, i.e. the game engine is told what resolution it needs to render the game in, how lots level of details are handled for various assets, and while all of this is simplified of course, hopefully you get an idea where I'm going with this. DirectX 12 Ultimate really is aiming to unify development around the Microsoft ecosystem and provide developers a base set of features across both the Xbox Series X and PC. Naturally, there will be tech which emerges throughout the life cycle of the Xbox which can be added to PC, which developers are free to implement as they so desire. For example, right now a developer is free to incorporate, say, DLSS technology from Nvidia. But we'll discuss this in a separate video for console as well as PC. Similarly, specific tech could be part of the Xbox Series X, as I'm pretty sure that there is custom hardware in the Xbox Series X which wouldn't really be pertinent in the PC space. And I've already discussed at length of questions regarding how PC will eventually come to deal with other things which are standard in the consoles, such as, let's say, SSDs. Long story short on that, and you can check out my video if you want more, this will likely come down to several different possibilities, including just simply increasing the RAM requirements for games, such as moving to 32GB and then just sticking lots of stuff into RAM, or making SSDs mandatory. But once again, if you want more on this, you can check the video which is linked in the description. But then again, maybe some of the features for DirectX 12 Ultimate will help here. Speaking of these features, what exactly are they? Well, in a nutshell, much of the underlying DirectX 12 feature set hasn't really been touched with DX12 Ultimate, but there are several major enhancements to the API. Raytracing is the big headliner most people will be familiar with. Honestly, raytracing to me is probably the biggest leap in visual quality in the last 10 years. In essence, the goal is to accurately depict how light will act in the real world, so it can look considerably more realistic than what would be possible with traditional rasterization techniques, such as SSR, or screen space reflections, and shadow maps. Rays are cast into the scene, which then figure out what light would interact with based on the sources of light in that scene. Then, from there, figure out what light would be reflected from what surfaces. So, for example, a mirrored surface might reflect onto another mirrored surface. So, a car would reflect upon themselves if it's highly polished, or an orange painted wall behind a white car would reflect some of its light onto the car. So the white car would then have some subtle orange hue, based of course from the light which was reflected from the wall. But then think of this, there may be second or third bounces of light. So the orange light which bounced from the wall would bounce to the car, but then that would bounce to other surfaces on the car. This has benefits of being able to shadow and light things from objects which are not in screen space, and also this would just be difficult to achieve with traditional techniques. I know I said this earlier, but I will go much deeper into ray tracing soon, and are working on a rather lengthy discussion of it and upsampling techniques such as DLSS. I really want to put those into separate topics because I feel they're so pertinent for the next generation. Variable rate shading is actually one of those names which fairly accurately describes what the tech does. High performance hardware is great, but if you don't put the power to good use, it doesn't mean much. Developers spend time, of course, optimizing their titles for best performance, especially on console, but variable rate shading is a tool to enable developers finer grained control over what elements of a scene get the most shading performance. Consider this. If you're playing a game like Wolfenstein Youngblood, and there's a bunch of enemies close by, and you're attempting to not have the big robot dog use a flamethrower on you, are you more concerned and focused on that, or the details in the far background? VRS enables developers to selectively reduce the rendering quality of elements of a scene which won't distract from the visual quality of a scene, because let's say the object is far away or blurred by motion, and then you can save that power and achieve higher frame rate, or they can instead leverage that power into pushing higher visual quality into elements of the scene which you do care about, such as the flamethrower dog. Just like ray tracing, Nvidia were the first to push this with NAS, Nvidia Adaptive Shading, and a few games already support it, such as the aforementioned Wolfenstein Youngblood. Another benefit of VRS, variable rate shading, is it also enables foveated rendering as well, which is for VR. Here, what's inside your peripheral vision gets less detail, and what your eyes are focused on gets rendered in higher detail, i.e. the headset tracks the fovea of your eye, hence, well, the name. VRS is a major win for gamers and developers, because lower end hardware will be able to push higher frame rates and visual quality, and this echoes naturally throughout the hardware system. As for the Xbox Series X, it will also be crucial as well, because with fixed hardware, such as consoles, optimization is a key weapon developers have to squeeze the most performance out of the system. Mesh shading is unfortunately a little bit more of a complicated topic. Nvidia have created the Asteroids demo, which provides a glimpse at the performance saving of this tech. The asteroid field doesn't look very impressive at first glance, until you realise what can actually happen here is asteroids which are further away or partially obscured can indeed be created with way less geometry detail, basically fewer triangles for the base geometry and more detail for closer asteroids. In that way, it's a bit like VRS, although rather than shading, i.e. which is applying things such as texture or detail, here we are referring to the underlying geometry of a scene, and it's also a lot more complicated and a lot more flexible than that. It does this by radically changing how GPUs handle geometry. The model traditionally used does not take advantage of how GPUs really function under the hood. Traditionally, with the previous model, the geometry pipeline doesn't really take the full advantage of the massive parallel nature of GPUs. GPUs are really a collection of hundreds, or more likely in a higher end GPU, thousands, or even the Xbox thousands, of SIMD processors. Each of these come together to form massive amounts of parallel computational performance, able to work together on threads using small chunks of cache on the die to share data. With mesh shading, we see the GPU essentially drop the traditional method of geometry creation and instead simplify the drawing of geometry by instead using what you can really say is a compute shader. This much better leverages the number of threads across a GPU, and this also has tremendous benefits in simplicity, but also performance as well, i.e. culling. Microsoft have already shown a demo of various forms of mesh shading culling for both the Xbox Series X and PC. And here we can clearly see there's a tremendous benefit with culling. If parts of the object are obscured by, say, a wall or viewing angle, you do not want to draw this, but moreover you want to stop the drawing process as early as possible. Developers can be much more aggressive and accurate with culling when they use mesh shaders, saving huge amounts of performance and rendering time. In essence, mesh shaders rewrite how geometry is created on the GPU, provide access to more performance, and also fine-grained control on how it functions. Sampler feedback is slightly more complicated still, but really has tons of uses. But once again, it really comes down to empowering developers and improving performance. It focuses this time on memory usage, and as you are likely aware, when geometry is drawn, it has textures applied to it, which of course provide the actual detail to an object. Textures though are typically created with different LODs, levels of detail, so that stuff which is further away can have a lower level of texture detail applied. Memory is not infinite, so higher quality textures can quickly eat up huge amounts of data on the GPU. To this end, data is streamed in and out of the GPU as needed. The closer you get to an object, in the background for example, the game engine starts to swap out the lower quality LOD with the higher quality one. The problem is though, what textures are being sampled is not easy to figure out until now. It seems like it would be, but it's actually not. And so the sampler feedback provides a method for both the game engine and developers to better understand this, which will be extremely important for creating highly detailed worlds and also minimize texture pop-in, while also reducing the chances of stutter and ensuring the lowest possible memory footprint. We will also see the usage of screen space shading be possible now, again allowing for greatly more efficient rendering. More complicated lighting techniques, for example, can be created in object space and then written into a texture. I'd like to thank Zotac for sending over an RTX 2070 Super and MSI for sending over an RTX 2060 Super, which we use in our Wolfenstein tests here. But these cards will also be featured heavily in my upcoming look at DLSS and Raytracing as well. Also, big props to ASRock for sending over a Z390 Phantom Gaming motherboard, and of course Intel for providing an i9 9900K. So let's draw some conclusions and wrap things up. DirectX 12 Ultimate is a feature set update for DirectX 12, and brings numerous enhancements such as ray tracing and variable rate shading to the table. As well as that, we have feature parity with the Xbox Series X and high-end modern graphics cards for the PC, which will mean that developers have access to unified tools across both platforms. This means that developers are free to optimize their games a lot more, as well as pursue new graphics techniques like ray tracing. You can make a very compelling argument that the sweet spot for PC gaming right now is 1440p high refresh rate, and those panels are becoming a lot more commonplace. But Even 4K higher refresh rate gaming is going to eventually become more obtainable. Technology such as the things we've mentioned here, as well as AI upscaling like Nvidia's DLSS technology, will be critical for developers to pursue in the future. After all, as I've mentioned many times now, it's not just about raw performance, but also about how you utilize that performance smartly. Hopefully, you've enjoyed the video though. If you did, of course, leave a like on the video because that does help us out a lot in YouTube land. And speaking of YouTube land, if you subscribe to the channel, please consider ringing the bell icon as well because, well, YouTube, for some reason, with the notifications. And, with any luck, you will have an amazing day. You can also find links to our social media in the video description, as well as Patreon if you do decide to support the channel. That would of course be greatly appreciated. Don't feel you have to or anything, but do know that anything you do donate to the channel does of course help us with equipment costs, and if you prefer though, you can also find some Amazon affiliate links, so if you need to buy something given the current global conditions, then of course if you use one of those Amazon affiliate links, it doesn't cost you anything extra, but it does give us a few pennies. But anyway, I'm going to let you all go. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.